Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. Today we're going to tackle a rather controversial subject. In February 2019, a series of clashes between Indian and Pakistani air forces took place over the disputed Kashmir region. It was the first time that military aircraft of these nations crossed the so-called line of control since the 1971 war. And both sides agree on very few details of what really happened. The whole thing was triggered by a suicide attack against a police station in the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir. It resulted in death of 40 Indian police officers, for which India blamed Pakistan, since the group that stood behind this attack was based in Pakistani territory. Indian leadership then decided to launch an airstrike against what was believed to be a terrorist training camp. It was located near Balakot on the Pakistani side. The attack was launched in the early hours of 26 February 2019, and the strike force consisted of 6 Mirage 2000s armed with Israeli-produced Spice 2000 gliding bombs. They came within range of their weapons and released them. Here's where things start to differ. According to the Indian side, the bombs hit their intended targets and killed a large number of terrorists. According to the Pakistani side, all of the bombs missed and hit a forested area hundreds of meters away. And the target wasn't even a training camp, but a madrasa, a religious seminary. The main reason for the failure being a quick intervention by Pakistani fighters, which caused Indian Mirages to drop their bombs hastily. European Space Imaging published high-resolution satellite photos of the area the next day, and the buildings indeed seemed intact. Pakistani side was now expected to retaliate, and India was prepared for an attack. Nighttime was the obvious choice, but Pakistan waited until morning, hoping that the Indians would let their guards down a little. The airplanes Pakistan chose for the airstrike were JF-17 and Mirage 5. Both of these used indigenously developed weapons such as Mark 83 range extension kit and H-4 standoff weapon developed in cooperation with South Africa. In the case of the latter, Mirage 5s released them, and then they were guided via data link by Mirage 3 DA 2-seaters. The strikers were escorted by more JF-17s and F-16s. The targets of these airstrikes were Indian military garrisons. However, according to Pakistani explanation, their aircrews deliberately aimed at open spaces within them in order to avoid casualties, which would inevitably cause more retaliation and possibly an open war. Videos exist which show sensor images on which pilots first aim directly at their targets and then move the aiming points away. Pakistani airstrikes caused the reaction of Indian defenses, which included types such as Sukhoi 30 MKI, Mirage 2000 and MiG-21. What exactly happened is contested by two sides to this day. Before we go into that, let me move to a disclaimer. This will probably be the most important one on this channel until now, so please don't comment until hearing this. This video will show scenes as interpreted by both sides. This does not imply that any of these interpretations is the correct one. We are merely showing this event as it is described by both sides. Also, there are several approximations of assets used here. The reason being, of course, limitation of available assets in DCS World, which we used as the reenactment platform. In the opening scenes, you can see Mirages releasing laser-guided bombs instead of Spice 2000, because the latter is not available, just like the version of Mirage used by India here. We also don't have the Mark 83 range extension kits or the H-4. Some of the F-16s used here with two-seater versions. We only have single-seaters in DCS. Perhaps most importantly, we also don't have the MiG-21 Bison variant of the iconic Russian fighter. The closest thing we have is the older BIS variant armed with R-60 missiles. More on that later. And finally, this is not the actual map of Kashmir, this is northern Syria and southern Turkey. If any of these things bother you, please stop watching. Let's now see how things happen according to Indian side. The main source was an article written by Samir Joshi, a former Indian fighter pilot. You can find the link in the video description. Pakistani Barkap, consisting of two flights of 4 F-16s from 9th and 29th Squadrons, launched 4 to 5 AMRAAM missiles on Indian Air Force Sukhoi 30 MKIs, claiming a kill. Two Pakistani formations then fell back, and the third formation, call sign Alpha, formed a Barkap in depth. One flight launched by IAF was a pair of MiG-21s led by Wing Commander Abhinandan Vartaman of the 51st Squadron. His flight crossed the line of control in pursuit of Pakistani F-16s who had previously entered Indian airspace and launched AMRAAM missiles at Sukhoi 30s. Abhinandan was then warned by fighter control about the F-16 Barkap turning towards him. He was advised to go cold, meaning to turn back. His wingman indeed turned back, but Abhinandan pressed on. His radar indicated two targets at about 30 to 35 kilometers. He then switched his radar to close combat mode, trying to get a radar-assisted lock for his R-73 missile. While he was climbing, he got a lock tone from one of his R-73s. He then launched it and turned away, eventually settling on an eastern heading towards the line of control. His missile eventually hit the Pakistani F-16, call sign Alpha 3, which at the time was attacking Abhinandan's number 2 with an AMRAAM missile which missed. About 45 seconds after Abhinandan launched his missile, he was hit by an AMRAAM launched by an F-16. He ejected on the Pakistani side. After landing, he was attacked by civilians but eventually captured by Pakistani army. Wing Commander Abhinandan Varthaman was released several days after this incident. Now let's see things from the Pakistani side. The main source was an article written by Alan Warnes, originally published in Air Forces Monthly and available online on keymilitary.com. As already mentioned, Pakistanis claimed that the Indian Balakot strike was a failure. The strike force of Indian Mirage 2000s escorted by Sukhoi 30s was detected by Pakistani radars, and JF-17s and F-16s were launched to intercept it. This caused the strikers to release their weapons and turn back. Retired Air Commodore Kaiser Tufail is quoted saying that target elevation picked by weapons GPS did not match the orthometric height and the bomb simply overshot. Pakistan then launched the already mentioned attack, which achieved surprise on the Indian side. Several flights of Sukhoi 30 MKIs, Mirage 2000s, and MiG-21s were launched to meet the attackers. However, Pakistani side employed successful electronic jamming using their modified Dassault Falcon 20 ECM. This prevented the Indian side from having a clear picture of the situation. Two PAF F-16s, led by squadron leader Hassan Siddiqui, were vectored on a flight of Indian Sukhoi 30s. He then launched an AIM-120C AMRAAM, which according to his F-16B fire control computer hit the target. The engagement took place on the Indian side and it was never confirmed, even though it was first announced that it was a JF-17 who scored against the Indian fighter. Furthermore, an Indian Mi-17 helicopter was then accidentally shot down by a friendly Spider surface-to-air missile. This was used by Pakistan to support the Sukhoi 30 shoot-down theory because the helicopter was likely on a combat search and rescue mission. Air Commodore Kaiser Tufail is quoted saying that Pakistani side intercepted Indian radio communications in which a Sukhoi 30 claimed bingo fuel, while two Mirage 2000s declared radar failures. This left the Indian side with MiG-21s to rely on. They were originally supposed to operate with their radars off, while Sukhoi 30s were to supply them with information about enemy contacts via data link. However, due to the situation and Pakistani jamming, the Bisons were not getting any info from the flankers. Wing Commander Abhinandan Vartaman was vectored towards the Pakistani aircraft and stayed low to avoid being detected by ground radars, but he was picked by Pakistani airborne radars. Abhinandan was told by his controller to turn back, but he apparently never heard this. Crossing the line of control without having clear situational awareness, he was attacked by an F-16 followed by Wing Commander Noman Ali Khan, the commanding officer of the 29th Squadron aggressors. An AMRAAM missile hit the MiG-21, the pilot ejected, and he was eventually captured by the Pakistani army. As you could see, almost the only thing that the two sides agree upon is that the MiG-21 flown by Abhinandan Vartaman was shot down by a Pakistani fighter. Most other things are disputed. Perhaps the first thing we should ask ourselves is whether it is even possible for an outdated Russian fighter from 1950s to shoot down a much more recent American F-16. Generally speaking, it is. For one thing, MiG-21 Bison is not exactly 50s Russian technology. It is very significantly updated with Israeli 4th generation avionics and more modern Russian R-77 and R-73 missiles. Under right circumstances, such a fighter can surprise any other fighter and hit it with its highly capable missiles. We can then examine possible motives which both sides might have to distort the truth. For the Indian side, it is probably a question of political support for the government. If the Balakot strike was indeed a failure, India wouldn't have much to show for, losing an additional airplane in the Pakistani retaliatory strike. But shooting down one of the Pakistani premier fighters by an older Indian fighter is definitely something. As for the Pakistani side, there's also the matter of political support and embarrassment of losing a fighter to an inferior type. Furthermore, USA is involved here too. F-16 has been one of its most successful export products. One being lost to an antiquated Russian type might be really bad for further sales. What kind of evidence do both sides offer? As for India, they start with Pakistanis initially claiming that 2 Indian pilots were in custody of Pakistani army. The second pilot was then reported to have died in the hospital. Later, however, Pakistan claimed having captured only 1 Indian pilot. This suggests that the second pilot might have been the Pakistani F-16 pilot who was either injured in his ejection or mistaken for an Indian pilot after landing and injured by an angry mob. India further submitted their radar records, which according to them demonstrated that F-16s were indeed used in the clash, which Pakistan initially denied, fearing American sanctions for their inappropriate use. Also, the radar picture seems to indicate that MiG-21 and F-16 were close and that they both vanished from the screen. Various eyewitness accounts and video recordings from the ground are being used to support the 2 aircraft going down theory. Samir Joshi analyzes the videos in great depth, providing their geographical locations and interpreting them. There's also a very detailed analysis of possible aircraft and missile flight parameters, but details about it would make this video way too long. You can check the article link in video description. How about the Pakistani side? For one thing, they showed all 4 missiles which were supposedly carried by Abhinandan's MiG-21, 2 R-77s and 2 R-73s, suggesting that none was fired. Indian side, however, claims that 2 of them look suspiciously undamaged, but that is explained by the fact that the MiG crashed on the left side. Another evidence claimed by Pakistan is that USA officially counted all Pakistani F-16s and found none missing. This is also disputed by India, and Pentagon and the State Department don't seem to have issued a confirmation of this, at least none that I could find. What can we conclude from all of this? Do we have a definitive answer on whether the Indian MiG-21 shot down a Pakistani F-16? Not exactly. The only thing that would put an end to this question is if one of the governments came clean and admitted the truth. But if this ever happens, we are probably decades away from anything similar. Both views were presented as objectively as possible, which I'm sure many of you will dispute, and scenes of two scenarios were reenacted as closely as we were able to. Both pilots involved in this incident, Wing Commanders Abhinandan Vartaman and Noman Ali Khan, were credited with kills and decorated for their actions. If you like the video, be sure to press the like button. That's an enormous help for the channel. If you're able to, you can support the channel on Patreon, which would help even more. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and keep watching Showtime 112.